emergency for the first time in about
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus. You have accessed entry 197.JB2825, certificate number 47447. Henry Cavendish.
I remember growing up thinking that shy was kind of a personality type.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I think you're very aware of shyness because unless you're like the 1 percentile most outgoing kid, you're shy in some ways, right? You're shy of new people or you're shy of adults.
Were you shy?
I feel like I was shy of grown-ups. I remember hiding behind some curtains in our living room one time because my parents had friends over and I did not want to be on display.
As far as my family's like historiography goes, I was not shy at all. My mom said that when I was an infant or very, toddler age child, I would try to meet the eyes of every person in the grocery store. And if one of them would meet my eyes, I would bat my eyelashes and, try to get them to come over and
a young Bill Clinton
tickle me under the chin.
Goes to Albertsons to woo all the moms.
Always loved grown-ups. I think if there's any place I was shy, it was with other kids. In the sense of like, there's a group of kids playing over there. I have no idea how to approach them, how to behave.
Yeah, I feel like when we talk about the foundational traumas of childhood, we always focus too much on the family. Like it really is just the terror of what some other kid on the playground might do.
Yeah.
What if he just said something mean or knocked you over for no reason? Like that's more dangerous than almost, for most of us than anything that could happen at home. So I think a lot of people, those are the foundational childhood experiences.
I didn't relate to other little boys. I would go try and talk to them. And I don't know if you remember all the way back to where your son was a little boy, but little boys don't want to talk. They want to do something.
To make truck noises with their mouths.
Yeah, they want to hit you, knock you down. So I would go try and talk to them, and I was never successful until I figured out that the girls were my friends.
Yeah, that's a lot easier. But, that's its own kind of terror, too.
that continues to govern my life.
I just feel like shyness now, I think of it as a symptom of, it could be any number of things. Like my daughter has, she was always a super outgoing kid that would just march up to any little kid on a playground and they'd be best friends in 5 minutes, and then she'd cry on the car on the way home because she'd never see them again. But, she kind of has a real anxiety about dealing with adults to the point that like, she doesn't want to order in restaurants. She's like, you order for me. I don't want to have to choose and I don't want to have to talk to the server,
Right. She's pretty good with us.
Oh yeah. Like, if anything, she's overconfident with people she knows.
Yeah.
But there's that, or there's, just kind of an introvert kind of a personality. I mean, you and I might both have this to some degree where, we can work a room, but that's not how we recharge.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I feel like these days, or at least in the last 10 years, shyness has become almost a political designation, right? There are people who are adults and identify as super shy, and that dictates how they live their lives. who their friends
Well,
are.
I'm okay with, the extroverts have ran the culture for so long.
Oh
I think
my
it's
God.
okay to have them be the uncool ones for a change and to have
sure.
everybody online just jumping to be the first one to announce, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm actually, wait for it, an introvert.
Yeah. Who would have guessed?
Bet you didn't see that coming.
Extroverts suck.
So there's that. And then there's, just varying places on, maybe what our parents would have thought of as severe shyness, we now would diagnose as different locations on a spectrum
Right.
of autism or similar behaviors.
Right.
Where, there's actually something neurologically different about the way the person handles sociality and social cues.
Right. I mean, it's why there is such a thing as a librarian.
Someone has to sit in a quiet room far away. I've said this before, but when I worked in tech, I was just surrounded by people who had chosen a job where they would never have to see anyone.
Yeah.
Least of all a user of the thing they're working on,
What's interesting is that some of the most introverted people I know who formerly worked in offices before the pandemic, in conversation with them, I always kind of open with, boy, you must love the pandemic because you don't have to deal with people anymore. And I've heard multiple very shy, introverted people say, actually, I had plenty of solitude before because I made sure of it. My work life was the only place I interacted with people, and I miss it.
Right. Their ideal was not zero interaction. They had cleverly managed the kind and amount of interaction they wanted.
Yeah.
And then
And now
the
just
virus took it away.
That little bit of like standing next to the microwave in the employee break room, it was enough interacting with colleagues.
Because I've been very lucky to have the pandemic privilege of just, to live with some people I like.
Right.
And that kind of blunts it because they were most of the people I would see on a normal day,
Can you imagine, and I'm sure this is true for millions of people, they don't like their home.
Right.
They have a bad dad or a bad roommate or like an alcoholic mother or whatever.
Or a brick wall instead of a view. They look
Yeah.
forward to just, decompressing for a few hours in a bar or a club or a restaurant or a bookstore.
Right. They have a cot in a single room occupancy hotel, and this has been a nightmare.
That's the place they retreat to for the least amount of time possible. And then this.
Yeah. I do feel lucky about that.
Do you know people who are maybe performative or bordering on exhibitionistic in some professional field, but are kind of painfully shy in person?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah, that's not uncommon, right?
Not at all.
Musicians or
in the early day, back when rock and roll was a very different thing, rock musicians and sex workers had a lot of overlap socially. And I knew a lot of women in their 20s that were making a living, performatively as dancers or other kind of burlesque performers. And a lot of them were not especially social, but had figured out a way to, behind glass or on a stage, be what you would, the most social and exposed, but it did not convey to who they were and what where they really lived.
they're just a Flintstone bird on a record player.
Yeah,
It's a living.
They didn't come down off the stage and go like, "Let's go!" They were very
Who's
much
ready
like
to party?
put their hood up and went home.
Is so I think we all know shy, border anywhere from like quiet and prefers a small group of friends all the way to painfully shy.
Mm-hmm.
As far as you could push the envelope is one of the greatest scientists of his time, Henry Cavendish.
Perhaps not coincidentally, right? Like
Yes.
super far out on the wing, and also one of the great scientists.
Yeah, I mean, when you're playing the game of retroactively diagnosing different kinds of personality conditions, in this case, autism or Asperger's syndrome, it's always difficult to do on the basis of the evidence.
Yeah. When you read back in history,
right? These people who are trying to decide whether or not Thomas Jefferson, where he was on the autism spectrum or whatever, because it's difficult. You're judging by the standards of a different era. You have the conflicting reports of what other people said about them.
Yeah.
You didn't actually have diagnosticians doing any of this stuff.
the recognition that my grandfather was probably bipolar explained a lot of things to my mom when I was diagnosed with bipolar.
We used to say,
or when I admitted it.
We used to say melancholy instead of clinical depression.
Manic depression.
He grappled with melancholy.
And he did, that really characterized an aspect of her childhood. And to put it into some kind of, but who knows? Who knows what motivated him?
Melancholy makes it seem like a mood. It's almost like a chosen vibe rather than, our current language, which correctly identifies it as just a neurochemical, physiological thing.
Well, or it's one of the humors, right? He had too much yellow bile.
Which is the humor of
melancholy?
Phlegm?
Yeah, it's phlegmatic.
Too much phlegm. Have these guys ever just thought of blowing their nose?
The thing is, I identify as phlegmatic, and I don't like it. I don't like to be phlegmy, but you can hear it in my voice.
None of the humors sound good.
Right, that's true.
Is it good to have too much black bile? Hey, good news. You have too much yellow bile. But this is a case where the retroactive diagnoses, like those of some other scientists, as you were saying, it's not a coincidence. Often it's the greatest thinkers who, the fact that they were thinking outside the box and not a typical person of their time is reflected in their intellect as well, right. and their psyche. Oliver Sacks, of Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat fame, seems relatively confident that the Honorable Henry Cavendish is just textbook autistic. And his behavior makes it very clear. And he's not, people say that about Isaac Newton, a lot of these people that just had difficulties with relationships and yet were just expanding the boundaries of human knowledge.
Right.
Cavendish was, by the way, this is a request of our NASA friend, Neil, that we spoke to recently.
Oh yeah, Neil, a very accomplished young man.
He loves... He works on ground telemetry for weather satellites, he said.
Right.
But also he's thinking of getting out of it in order to get into indie film.
Yeah, he's artistic, but currently works for NASA on behalf of NOAA.
Yes, NOAA's not allowed to do its own rockets anymore because they have been very naughty.
Although they tried. That was the best part of the story. NOAA had its own rocket program for a while and couldn't make it work. I wonder why.
It went so badly that now Congress makes NOAA outsource its launches to NASA. Anyway, Neil, the Honorable Henry Cavendish, I guess, has been a hero and source of a fascination for our friend Neil. And he was afraid that Cavendish would not be eligible for omnibus because we recently covered the Cavendish banana.
Right.
Who is named for, I guess, the sixth, what was their rank?
Earl of
sixth
Cavendish?
Earl of Baron? No, what are they? They are...
Viscount.
You have too much Viscount. Your Viscount is too viscous. He was the sixth Duke? Is that right?
That's pretty high.
He was the sixth Duke of Devonshire.
Oh, he's a big wheel.
And Henry Cavendish, in fact, was the grandson of the second Duke of Devonshire. So if my graph is right here, they were first cousins twice removed.
So Henry Cavendish precedes...
Yes, by a couple generations.
Banana.
And Henry Cavendish, as you can imagine, by being the grandson of the second Duke of Devonshire, was the highest born British thinker of his time. Of all the intellectuals of that time, he wasn't just the leading thinker, but as we will see, he was far ahead of the curve there. But
what was his time and who were his peers?
He was born in basically the 18th century. His dates are 1731 to 1810. So all the great British scientists of that time, Robert Boyle, James Watt, the Royal Society, and his dad, in fact.
Age of Enlightenment.
Enlightenment era, yes. And his dad, Charles Cavendish, was a leading physicist of his generation. And so even though he's born an aristocrat, he's born in Nice to aristocratic parents.
How was his father ennobled?
Well, the
first Duke.
His father was the second Duke.
Oh.
His father, William Cavendish, the first Duke of Devonshire. Oh, as you would expect for the time frame, you can probably do the math. Glorious Revolution.
Oh, sure.
He
came back. The big comeback.
Yes, he was
big comeback.
Whig politician from the House of Commons. But his father was the Earl of Devonshire, so he was already from a noble family. But It was
he got elevated.
Yeah, it was his part in inviting William and Mary to depose the Stuarts that got him his dukedom.
Right.
Is that the word? Dukedom?
Yeah, dukedom. Dukerage.
So Cavendish came from a super wealthy family. However, he did not see much of it. Through a combination of his parents or his dad's thriftiness and his own eccentricity, he spent most of his life living what is sometimes claimed to be a pretty impoverished lifestyle. He always wore the same kind of the suit that his grandparents would have worn, I think is what is often said.
Yeah, but isn't this just the shabby chic of the super rich? Did he drive the same Volvo 240 for 15 years?
I don't know if they had that then. I feel like the rich then really wanted to look rich. Mm-hmm. Do you think they had shabby chic? That's a modern innovation of, I think, mass manufacturing, making it possible for anybody to have crazy made in Vietnam bling.
Well, it does feel though that this was also the era of the of creating sort of an idyllic village folly on the back 40 of your, there was a rusticity movement, maybe not. Well, sure. I mean, I think it was beginning then, a kind of, taking great pleasure in the idea of the noble savage. But I don't know. You're right. I don't know if that means that you would wear your great grandfather's tweeds.
Yeah, I kind of doubt it. That seems more like a hypothetical. Boy, wouldn't it be great just to wear deer skins and live in the woods? You know what? You could actually do that, your lordship. Oh, well, I'm not sure about that.
Live in a shack on the pond.
But when you look at what his actual allowance was, he was getting 500 pounds a year.
That's a lot.
So despite the fact that people are saying he always wore the same deeply out of fashion suit and lived in these converted stables that his dad said he could have for an apartment, he's also getting the equivalent of $50,000 today.
Yeah.
So maybe by his family standards, he's living a weirdly ascetic lifestyle.
Right.
But that's only by aristocratic standards. In an age with a healthy middle class, he would be doing just fine.
He's fine.
And, but his only social outlet was the Royal Society, which his father was a member of, and which he joined in 1760. And that was the only thing his father would ever give him money for. His dad would give him 5 shillings for him to go attend the dinners of the Royal Society. Now, even though these were his only social,
obligations?
Yeah, his only social life at all. He was not comfortable there either. This is a guy who his biographers have said were shy and bashful to a degree bordering on disease. So even then they realized this is not just a quiet oddball. This is, even in an age before our modern understanding of mental health, these guys are like, this seems like a symptom of something physical.
And the Royal Society was a scientific gathering.
Yeah, these are all natural philosophers.
Right.
And he was very respected there. But people would try to talk to him and they would say it was talking as it were to vacancy.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't tell there was anything going on in his face. And if you were interesting enough, you would either get like a squeaky, mumbled reply. Apparently he had a very high-pitched voice. Or you would see an actual vacancy because he would scurry away to some part of the room where nobody was trying to talk to him.
Right. Well, and this was an era when scientists were also expected to have theories and be pen and ink artists and polymaths. Yeah,
they're big talkers. This guy, it would have been expected for him to be able to, get up and give a speech.
Right.
And that was not him at all. In fact, even at the Royal Society, his only peer group, he would often be spotted just kind of loitering outside the room, trying to work up the courage to actually go into a room with people in it.
Right. Sounds like me at my high school cotillion club.
I feel like it sounds like anybody in high school. I bet that's relatable to a lot of Omnibus listeners. Yeah. There's a famous story of a visitor coming to, I think, the fellow scientist, and I think Royal Society president, if I remember right, Joseph Banks, introduced Cavendish to an Austrian thinker who admired his work. And the Austrian says, I've come to London just to meet you, sir. I admire your this and your that and your experiments and blah, blah, blah. And Banks wrote, in reply, Cavendish answered not a word, but stood with his eyes cast down, quite abashed and confounded. At last, spying an opening in the crowd, he darted through with all the speed of which he was master, nor did he stop until he reached his carriage, which drove him directly home.
Yes!
So this guy is charting new ground.
What a hero.
In the avoidance of social connection.
Yeah.
He could not talk to more than one person at a time, and that person could not be a woman. He was unable to even stammer out a reply in the presence of a woman.
Right.
Kind of maybe an early Mike Pence type. He was, he wrote notes to communicate with his household staff. There's some famous story of, I guess this is also a story of his cheapness and eccentricity, but he's having some scientists apparently are coming over. There's been 3 scientists coming over to collaborate with him on something. And his housekeeper sends him a note saying, well, the normal leg of mutton will not be enough, sir, for there's going to be 4 people. And he replied, by 2.
By 2 legs of mutton.
He was not going to give everybody their own leg of mutton.
It really makes you think. I mean, we think about people who were on the spectrum even 30 years ago, kind of suffering from just a general ignorance of what their condition entails.
Right. Like, why are you choosing to be weird like this?
Right. And now we understand at least somewhat, I mean, so much better, and are able to accommodate different, scales of sociality. But imagine in the 18th century how difficult it would be. When
you're in an aristocratic class where everybody is supposed to be breezy and self-possessed.
Yeah, what
and
a tragedy.
You were just having, the wheels churn, like, how soon can I get out of here?
But apparently he did not, because of his mind, he was interacting with the culture of science. He was not, he didn't just become a hermit.
That must show his deep love of that science, that he would keep going to those Royal Society dinners he hated.
Yeah.
Just because he needed the connection with the stream of ideas and the connection of other minds like his.
So explain his work.
Yeah. So his, one more thing about, I have to get this in about the servants.
Yes.
He also, in order not to see his female housekeeper, he built a separate set of back stairs.
It had stairs built.
Just so he would not have to see her. Shy Henry, they called him. But let's talk about his work. For most of the early period, the 1770s and the 1780s, he was what was called at the time a pneumatic chemist, which makes him seem like the Michelin Man, or just maybe a very buxom starlet. But that's just what they called people interested in the chemistry of gases. And he did incredibly groundbreaking work. Gases, were not well understood. He was living in an era where, people didn't know what oxygen or hydrogen were,
I still don't understand fully gases, but they weren't being captured, right? There was no jar of cyanide gas.
You couldn't see them. So there was a discussion of what they actually, what were these invisible things that, that can sometimes catch fire? Is it phlogiston? Is it going in the ether? What is happening here? It wasn't like a liquid or solid you could hold and do experiments on. It took.
But as you boiled water, it went somewhere.
Right. So he actually did a lot of work on water. His 1766 paper on factitious airs was a groundbreaking experiment in which he applied acids to metal and produced something he called inflammable air. He had just discovered hydrogen. And he later dissolved alkali salts like lye or potash or something in water, and it produced a different air, which he called fixed air. He had just discovered carbon dioxide. And he later went on to prove that what humans exhaled was largely this fixed air. He, having kind of figured out that air was apparently a mixture of these different kinds of things, he did a series of experiments to determine exactly what the ratios were, and determined that there's about 4 times as much nitrogen as oxygen in air. And he could not figure out, when he got rid of the nitrogen and the oxygen and the water vapor and the carbon dioxide, all these things that he had kind of hypothetically decided were in the atmosphere, he could not make the math work out. And there was still some residue, and he could not figure out what was wrong. And it was not until, I think, over a century later that much more advanced chemistry was able to demonstrate the existence of the noble gas argon,
Right.
which is present in Earth's atmosphere in, trace conditions, 1 part in, 400,000 or something like that.
Interesting that his math was so good that he could realize that it wasn't squaring, and he didn't just consider it a rounding error.
Right. There's some residue that he can't find, and it bugged him. And as we'll see, a lot of science at this period is just a matter of trying to figure out how to get instruments good enough to do meaningful work, because you're working with what by modern standards are incredibly blunt, primitive instruments. Having discovered that air had a inflammable, a very volatile, flammable component, later named hydrogen, he learned that you could, if you burned that stuff, you would make water.
Oh.
So he was either the first or among the first, there's some controversy here, to realize that water was H2O, that there's, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen make water. Water has a phlogisted part, the oxygen, and an unphlogisted part. And this actually led to quite a bit of controversy, because the same summer he was making these discoveries, James Watt was also doing similar experiments with, burning hydrogen and oxygen together. And so it led to what is called the water controversy. And then a French pneumatic chemist, Antoine Lavoisier, was kind of making this grand unified theory of chemistry based on a lot of these new findings. And because he took that finding further and, really was the one who visualized the structure of water and how that reaction works, he often gets the credit for the discovery that water is H2O. The ancients had thought it was just an element, a basic element that makes up the universe. And the idea that it might be made up of other things was the most groundbreaking reimagining of science possible, as late as the late 18th century. Was
Cavendish in touch with these other scientists? Were they exchanging information?
Yes. And, but this, especially the simultaneous discovery with Watt, seems to have been a coincidence, and it led to what was called then, and especially in Victorian times when it was kind of revived among scientists, as the water controversy. Who was the first person to revise the ancients' idea that water was just one atomic, unbreakable thing?
We see this happen in science all the time, right?
Right.
The 2 people working, or teams of people working,
different continents even.
Yeah, come up with the same.
The telephone, I think, is 2 people like less than a week apart. It's just an accident of who gets to the patent office first.
Right.
The time sometimes is ready.
Ken, I'm really proud of the Omnibus Patreon. I think it was far-sighted of us to turn to Patreon to fund the show. It enabled us to leave our formerly draconian corporate masters that kept us under their jack-heeled boot of
their single boot
of. It was a company that it was basically run by Captain Ahab. They only had 1 boot and an ivory leg.
And the ivory leg was on me, and the jack-heeled boot was on you.
Me. That's why I remember it more.
At all time. I just think about that cold ivory leg on the small of my back.
We loved doing this show from the first episode. We have such a good time doing it, but for a long time it was hard to understand why we were doing it.
We were afraid we were not going to be able to make it pay, and then we would not be able to do the show.
Yeah, it was hard to. We continued to do it almost for no compensation.
For 2 years.
Yeah, that's testament to how much we enjoyed doing it. But when we switched over to Patreon, which is, I think, still kind of an undersung platform, where
an undersung way for artists to find audiences to support them.
Yeah, it really is, and it's a fantastic way to fund something like an omnibus project, which is a lot of work for us and a lot of, although really fun. The Patreon enables us to connect with our audience a lot better, and we've kind of followed the model of having different tiers of membership, and those different tiers produce. There are actually like different rewards at the different tiers. That some of them are actual material items and real experiences. If
you enjoy Omnibus on any level, but you haven't looked into the Patreon,
I'm assuming that you do enjoy it.
Here's a quick rundown. What if they're just listening to a show to fall asleep, or
Even so, that's a kind of enjoyment.
They're not native English speakers, so they don't even know I'm
still enjoying it.
I wish I could plug the Patreon in Portuguese. I think that would really help.
I think that the Portuguese people listening to the show are going to be able to figure out what we're talking about.
El Patreon.
El Patron.
El Patron.
Wait a minute, that's a different
It's not a cigar or what is it, tequila?
It's a tequila, but also, yeah, it's your patron. It's the Catherine de Medici version or variation on the theme.
Except that it's not a small group of elite people making the kind of art they like possible. It's any kind of small niche of regular folks can toss in a few bucks and suddenly an artist is a going concern indefinitely.
That's right. And we're able now to make the omnibus program with a lot of confidence and enthusiasm. That's not just because of our friendship and our interest in esoterica, but also it's a craft industry for us.
Some of the advantages of Patreon membership, in addition to the show keeps going, would be the following. First of all, even at the very lowest donation tier, $5 a month, you receive a bonus episode of Omnibus every month.
And it's a specific and hilarious version of Omnibus where we read letters from futurelings who have something more to add to our episodes. And then sometimes we accept their contribution. Sometimes we bat it down like a cat with a moth.
Imagine a version of Omnibus that's actually both fun and fast-paced.
Weird.
And that's what you're missing out on with the monthly Addenda show.
What's interesting about the Addenda show is we do get to the topic right away.
We have to.
Yeah.
It's topic all the way down.
That's right.
At the next level, for $10 a month, you get the Addenda show, but you also get access to a visual archive on the Patreon that includes things like weird artifacts that listeners have sent us.
You and Mindy do a great job of taking pictures of all the weird stuff that we have and curating it into an interesting little.
It's all Mindy,
file.
all the notes you and I work from on the shows. If you want to see what didn't make the cut or which of us have legible handwriting, the answer is neither.
Yeah, Ken's handwriting is more. I don't know. It's smaller, a lot smaller than mine.
Yeah. I'm really proud of that.
Yeah.
I've really been working on that.
Good work.
As I get older, I'm trying to get my handwriting smaller and smaller.
You get more words on the page.
Yes. Until I die the very day that the width of my letters is 0 pica. At the next level, you get all that. Plus, you get mailed to your address a copy of one of these show notes, autographed and personalized by the two of us.
And that's at the $20 level?
Yes.
I mean, even there, we're talking about a couple $100 a year.
Less than you spend on Arby's.
Absolutely. I think even the vegetarians listening probably spend more than $200 a year at Arby's.
They do, because of the delicious vegetarian options at Arby's. What do you get there when you're not eating meat?
Arby's?
Yeah, what do you get at Arby's when you're not eating meat?
I'm always eating meat, so I only get Arby's meat
So
sandwiches.
you've never tried the carrot and quinoa salad?
Not at Arby's.
Or the chickpea sandwich?
I don't think I've tried that at
the
Arby's.
Falafel with barbecue sauce?
Barbecue sauce.
I don't actually know what the Arby's veggie options are.
Horsey sauce.
They must be delicious.
Horsey sauce salad.
You can get the potato cakes.
I don't like potatoes.
Oh, right.
Nope. I just get the meat. I get the meat sandwiches.
But for just a dent in your Arby's budget,
right,
you could give it that level. And if you've given it that level in the past, one thing we decided to do this year, because we didn't know if people would want a second identical pair of assigned show notes, is we also have been tossing in assigned chick tract.
Yeah, the signed chick tracts are a lot of fun. We have a good time with those. But these are real, these are things that have touched both our hands because we both signed them.
Yeah, first, so let them sterilize for a few hours once they arrive at your home.
Mine typically, some of them have coffee stains on them where I put my cup. Ken often will spit up some Diet Dr. Pepper when he laughs uproariously at one of my hilarious puns.
I've got doodles.
Yep. Oh, we both doodle.
Not very well. At the higher, more aspirational levels, at the next level, you can get all of the above benefits. Plus, you can request a show topic.
That's right.
On the omnibus of your choice.
Request/recommend. So some of our $50 donors really want a show done in their image. Some of them are really just trying to help and suggest things that wouldn't have come across our bow another way, but that feel very right at home with us.
Yeah, usually it's a collaborative process where a listener will say, well, here are a few things I'm interested in. And we will, usually they'll just be right down the plate because they've heard the show before.
Right.
Nobody's like, hey, can you do a show about my mom's girdle?
Right.
Although
we'd consider it.
And so we can usually shape the topic into a great show. And we've done some of our favorite shows have been listener suggestions.
Yeah, really good. Well, that's the thing about Futurelings. If you're a member of our Patreon, the assumption is that you're invested in the show and you want to have it be good.
You understand the vernacular and the aesthetic and the culture of it.
And then at the highest level of donation, Ken and I will actually, it's almost embarrassing how available we are, but we will actually hop on a Zoom call with you. And we've had so many fun Zoom calls this year with, you want to think that there's a kind of Futureling, but there's not. There's every kind of Futureling.
It has really been it's been a trip across the world, really, to chatting with all these people.
Yep. Interesting characters, and not a single one that, when we went into first doing Zoom calls with Patreon subscribers, we thought, oh boy,
what's this going to be like?
There's going to be a lot of real weirdos. And it turns out that was true.
But they are us. We are usually the weirdos on the call.
But they're super great. We've not had a bad one.
So if any of those benefits seem compelling to you and your budget allows, please join the almost 2,000 currently Omnibus listeners who help support the show every month on Patreon.
Yeah, it's definitely possible to support us on Patreon and not want any of those benefits and still feel like, yeah, I get a lot of enjoyment out of this show and I'm going to chip in a little bit of money because I'm an evangelist for this style of supporting the things you love. I didn't understand it very well at first, but I see now that a lot of creative people can turn their thing that would otherwise kind of not be sustainable into something sustainable just because a handful of people like it enough to support it in this way.
A record company or a TV network is not impressed by a little niche following, but so many cool artists are going to be able to, quit their day job because they have that niche following now.
Us included.
It's fantastic.
I don't know. Ken, do you want to quit your day job if they let you host Jeopardy?
It's unclear what my day job is right now. So luckily all my day jobs are like every few day jobs.
Yeah.
So, Omnibus is in good hands for the future.
Yeah, it's definitely sustaining me, and I've been emailing a lot of musicians I know saying, "Hey, I know you're struggling. You haven't been able to play any music this year. You should try reaching out to your fans in this way." Patreon.com/omnibusproject.
Cavendish, to the degree that he had any kind of awareness of other people, felt like he had been treated unfairly in the water controversy. And he decided to switch over to physics right around the mid 1780s, which is when he went from being an odd eccentric living in a stable to one of the richest men in England. His father, Charles Cavendish, finally died, leaving him just an insane fortune. At the time of his death, Cavendish was the biggest depositor in the Bank of England.
Wow.
I don't know, on reflection, maybe that doesn't mean he was the richest man in England, just the only eccentric that was keeping everything in a bank instead of
the one with cash.
Investing in he wasn't investing in the East India Company or whatever.
Yeah. Well, all those aristocrats are land rich, but cash poor typically.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. And he did spend the cash on real estate, but mostly because he wanted more lab space. He was still cheap. He was still skimping on the mutton to guests and wearing the same old, 100-year-old style suits, but he kept his old home near the British Museum, which I guess would be Bloomsbury, I think, which visitors said was mostly just books and scientific apparatus. He bought a second home in Soho, which he basically turned into a lending library. That was all of his books. And he would lend them out to other scientists using a card catalog system of his own invention until that got too unwieldy and he had to hire a German to run his own lending library.
That's cool.
That is cool, right? Like that's kind of a socially minded thing for a poster child of Asperger's to do for his community.
Yeah, well, or an aristocrat of any kind.
Exactly.
Yeah, at the time.
So this place in Soho becomes just a giant library, and he buys this giant house in Clapham, which is now kind of a slightly rundown part of South London, but at the time was kind of out in the country, where he bought this giant estate, and again, lived in a very tiny part of it and filled everything with his apparatuses as apparati and his experiments in progress.
I imagine that being a pneumatic scientist involves a lot of glassware.
I think it must.
Yeah.
And today we can just rely on getting precise glassware of every kind with the exact geometrically perfect shapes we need, all the measurements on them exactly right. At the time, these would all have been artisanal items that he would have had to oversee the creation of very carefully to get good results. And one place you can really see that is with his most famous experiment, which he performed at Clapham in 1783. It is kind of generally called the Cavendish experiment, although he did not devise it. A scientist named John Mitchell, who is not well known, but is one of the most, basically the father of seismology. He kind of first devised and propagated the idea that earthquakes might be waves moving through stone. There was a device called the torsion balance, in which a suspended rod with weights on it would spin. And it was mostly used in electrical experiments to determine electrostatic attraction between different things. You would have a capacitor that would pull something else toward it or something.
Right.
This John Mitchell scientist had thought with a precise enough torsion balance, you could actually measure gravitation with it as well.
Wow.
And one thing
it would have to be large also.
So that's what happens. You have on a twisting rod, you have two small lead balls, that weigh maybe a pound or two. And then at different points along that radius, you have two very large, like 300-pound lead balls. And
they're fixed.
They're fixed. And the whole thing is calibrated precisely enough that if you could let it spin, and if you could observe with no other, with your own observations not getting in the way of it, that the actual, we had Newton's second laws at this point. Mm-hmm. We knew that objects would attract each other relative to the square of their distance apart. You could, based on that, actually watch the small lead balls twist the rod toward the larger ones. Oh. And by doing so, you could measure gravity, even though, this is 1783 and people are still eating dirt.
How long did the rod have to be?
I've seen a picture of it. The rod is, I don't know, maybe a meter or so long.
Oh, I see. So not...
It's not some giant Foucault's pendulum.
Right.
The problem is you can't have any movement of the air, including by the scientist making the observations.
Right.
But
there were vacuums present by this time, right?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Scientists have access to vacuums.
I think you would have needed more, even if you had the ability to, you could definitely put a candle under a bell jar. People knew about the phenomenon of vacuum, but I don't think you could produce one on the scale needed to do this experiment. The rod is 6 feet long.
Okay.
So it's, the height of a person. And so, this is a large setup, and he doesn't, even in this giant house in Clapham, he doesn't have a place for it. So he builds a shed in his garden where he can build this giant suspended torsion balance, because what he wants to do, nobody at the time would have thought of it as, hey, I'm measuring the universal gravitational constant. What he was going to say is, I am going to measure the weight of the earth, because you could measure proportionally the amount to which this ball of a fixed mass is being drawn toward these larger ones. And then you could measure the amount by which that same ball is being drawn towards the earth, because that's just weight. By weighing how much that ball is pressing down due to gravity, that's the attraction between the earth and the little lead ball. So by judging the proportion between how much your little ball is attracted to this large weight and how much it's attracted to the earth, you can calculate pretty precisely, Mitchell thought, the weight of the world.
Wow.
So the whole point of this experiment is to measure how much the earth weighs.
Yes.
And, this is that's something that's easy for the layperson to grab a hold of. It's not that different than Eratosthenes putting a stick in the Sahara Desert in two different places and measuring the shadow and figuring out the size of the earth.
Right.
Yeah. Based on the curvature of the different, the angles of the two.
It was more than toothpicks that he put in the sand.
It's got to be something a little taller.
It was
than
a
that.
little taller, yeah.
So this is something that became famous in the neighborhood for many years thereafter. He, in order to not cause any air currents that would mess with his data, Cavendish actually, built this closed shed. He would start the torsion balance and then close in this airtight environment. So it's not a vacuum, but it's, there's no breeze. And he would leave the shed and observe through a telescope of his own devising, the degree to which the lead weights were attracted to each other in the balance. And he produced a measurement of the Earth's weight in pounds.
Right.
He now knows how many 1,000 billion pounds the Earth is or whatever. And it turns out his number was off by only like less than 1%. He, within 1%, he came within measuring effectively the mass of the Earth.
Still 100,000 million pounds. 1%.
He was way off. Don't get me wrong.
But that's incredible.
Yes, by the standards of the time, it was an amazingly successful experiment. And, many things came out of it. Findings in geology came out of it. For example, the number was so much larger that people thought, people knew the size of the Earth going back to the ancients. So given the mass, you now know the density basically. And he had discovered that the Earth must be metallic because his number demonstrated that there must be an iron nickel core or something of similar density.
Oh,
at the
also
center
a
of the
thing
Earth.
that there wouldn't have been anyone to know. Any way to know.
How else would you know? Yeah.
Right.
And at this point, it's purely theoretical.
The Earth is made of dirt, clearly.
It's dirt all the way down.
Not a hot iron core.
And it was not, and 100 years later, building on his results, people were able to calculate the gravitational constant precisely. And, he never would have thought of his work in that way, but he was effectively, his experiment is isomorphic to computing what's the gravitational constant? How much does gravity pull on you?
Are you asking me?
No.
Okay. Right. But he had to know that there was an intellectual history and that his work was meant to contribute to it. He wasn't doing this work in isolation. He was doing it to contribute. Well, his blending library is evidence. He was doing this for future scientists.
Yes, and he cared about his peers and interested in their findings. But you know what? Like, perhaps the most interesting thing about him was not well known until about a century later, and actually is a process that continues until today. His sense of obligation to his descendants apparently had its limitations. Either that or he just had such a restless intellect that he could not be slowed down. Because when the great physicist James Clerk Maxwell went through Cavendish's writings almost a century later, he was astounded to find that Cavendish was had done groundbreaking work in many other fields decades ahead of the people who later got credit for it.
Unpublished.
Completely unpublished. In the 1780s, a French scientist named Jacques Charles, for example, discovered what we still call Charles's law, a very basic gas law, which says that when you expand a gas, it increases, and here's how much its volume increases relative to a temperature increase. Cavendish had done that earlier. In 1785, Coulomb's law was discovered about electrostatics. It turned out that was part of a series of discoveries that Cavendish had made about the properties of conductivity much earlier. In the 1790s, a scientist named Richter discovered the law of reciprocal proportions, which is basically the whole mathematical undergirding of chemistry. It's what a chemist would call stoichiometry. These different chemical compounds and elements combine in even numbers, and because of that, you can tell what's actually happening on the atomic level. Apparently, Cavendish had been working on that during his lifetime earlier. In 1801, Dalton's law of partial pressures, how much the pressures of gas change when two different gases are combined. Cavendish had already done it. 1827, Ohm's law relating current, voltage, and resistance, the foundation for a whole bunch of modern knowledge about electricity. Cavendish had done that during his lifetime.
Many years prior.
Very recently, I think in the 21st century, it was discovered that Cavendish had done a lot of work on what he called fixed heat, or the mechanical theory of heat. And this is work that had not been analyzed with an eye toward thermodynamics ever. And scientists looking at his work very recently have thought this was the only person of his time who understood thermodynamics, a science that would not exist for almost another century. And this is just stuff he was doing home alone because he was playing his own ballgame by his own rules at a level that no other thinker was doing.
Why did he not publish this stuff? Why did he not advance it? It was just secondary to what he was working on, or did he recognize its import? Is that evident in his writing?
We'd have to speculate, because his shyness makes it impossible. His shyness is the key problem that makes him kind of unknowable.
Right.
People writing about him at the time or shortly thereafter who remembered him just kind of wrote about, the cryptic mystery of his personality. And nobody ever saw the notes in time to ask him, hey, did you just not see a person of intellect of his caliber must have seen the implications of some of this stuff. I mean, if I had to guess, it would be some mixture of, it would be something about his neuroatypicality. Mm-hmm. What's the word for that?
I think that works.
A neurotypicality. Where do you put the A?
I think neuroatypicality is how we're going to coin it here for the omnibus.
You put the A wherever you like.
I think it should have an extra L. Neuroaltypicality.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You need a Soviet style L.
Yeah. I wonder how much the implications of work then becomes a flight of the mind that requires metaphor and a kind of literary sort of progression to see that,
to put your insights into context, you mean?
Yeah, that if you're working within a very literal context of like what is a gas, but to discover thermodynamics and be able to, in effect, tell the story to yourself of how that could become a field, or how it would apply to things far flung.
Maybe that's a limitation. Maybe he had the kind of laser-like focus and ability to make unusual connections that we, associate with that kind of a savant.
Right. To say this is true, but how does it relate to what I'm working on?
Right.
Rather than say this is it.
Yeah, maybe he did not see the real world implications because of some of his isolation from the way most people think.
Yeah,
or it could just be restlessness. This is a guy who his amazing mind never stopped working, and it was just, oh, hey, look, these are whole numbers. There's something here. On to the next thing.
Yeah.
Because he's not following the same linear train of thought that a more ordinary mind might.
Oh, this is the thing about neural atypicality is we always try to interpret it by virtue of assuming that neurotypicality
here's
is the
normal
standard.
Good way to do stuff.
Yeah, right.
And there's a real limitation to that, especially when it's the atypical people that are pushing the frontiers. And it just occurred to me now that it's interesting to imagine what happens to somebody like Henry Cavendish if he was not born into a wealthy, educated, aristocratic family. Because clearly, the same year he was born, there were probably hundreds of other babies born in England with a mind with some of the same tendency towards savantism. But he would have been in a very forgiving little bubble that could see past his oddities and understand the value of what he could contribute. And that would not be true of a bunch of working class kids of his period.
Right. Well, and into a world where, the aristocratic culture has a lot of eccentricity as a result of, not having to do what anybody says, or right.
Genetic oddities.
Genetic oddities. So there would have been a tendency to say he's first and foremost the Duke. So we accommodate his needs rather than the other way around.
And, it makes me think that it's a very hopeful for today, in a world where, in theory, a lot more people with unusual minds are being understood a little better and have some of the, the kind of consideration that somebody like Cavendish would have been automatically given, especially once they can produce interesting or good work. Maybe now it won't be 1 in 100 that actually gets to be a savant.
Well, it's weird. The internet has always promised to turn the world into a meritocracy, but it keeps kind of failing to do that. And now we have the problem of there being so much noise. There are so many people publishing their theories. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff?
Especially in a time when it appears that these kind of, these unusual wheat mines maybe are propagating. Are there more of them than there used to be, or are we just seeing more of them than there used to be? It's not really clear, but
right.
It's possible we're speaking to a future civilization where, that kind of remarkable ability has become the norm and is not even commented on anymore. Instead, they have what they call the spectrum would be for people with our understanding of sociality. Oh, that poor kid. He makes eye contact in the supermarket.
Well, and also one of the weird things that we have no yet history of exploring is how much does outsiderdom, how much does a culture that does not accommodate you actually propel you? And as that
might be true in the arts. Do you think it's true in science?
I wonder.
Huh.
I mean, it's certainly true in the arts, but as we normalize the fringe, do we actually lose the power of working within the pressure of discrimination?
I agree. Society needs to work to provide enough normies to surround every gifted savant that they kind of feel the onus of difference and responsibility on them to do crazy stuff.
We should put every person with a slightly divergent nature into a sports bar and make them do their work sitting at a high table with people coming by going, woo!
And if we ever start to run short of normies because we're getting too many of these remarkable minds, we will need to invent robot normies.
Or clone normies.
Or clone them, sure.
Yeah, we just go to a Packers game and take like the 50 people closest to the field.
Isn't that why you go to sports events anyway, to scrape DNA off people?
Just to get normie DNA to make your clone army.
Could you lift your cheese head for a second? I need a hair with a follicle.
And that concludes Henry Cavendish, entry 197.JB2825. Certificate number 47447 in the omnibus. Futurelings, in the unlikely event that, surely the impossibility that social media still exists in your era in any form, it is like a self-defeating organism, right? It's a thing that is built to kill itself.
Well, we thought that about, the nuclear age too, and we got out of it. So who knows?
You're right. Maybe there will be a SALT II treaty about social media.
Yeah, who's the equivalent of the Soviet guy that sees a flock of geese and decides not to launch the missiles? Is there somebody like that who chooses not to release the meme that would have killed the entire
You know
internet?
what, Ken? Maybe it's me. You can find the Omnibus Project at Omnibus Project. Ken is out there at Ken Jennings. You can email us at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You can mail us actual things at P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155. What do you got over there, Ken?
I'm actually opening mail right now. John, dear John and Ken, a listener named Mr. Wacky.
Hi, Mr. Wacky.
Remembers you mentioning hipster light roast. And I don't remember what your thoughts were about light roast, but Mr. Wacky agrees with them.
Oh, I do not like light roast. I prefer a darker roast, honestly.
And as a result, he must have remembered that, and he sent you black gold whole bean
Texas tea.
That is. It seems like you can't get darker than black gold when it comes to dark roast coffee.
And what's great is it's in a coffee can. Not quite a Folgers coffee can, but it's
I thought, when I opened it, I thought it was going to be like government cheese.
Black Gold, a velvety smooth blend with notes of dark chocolate, toasted hazelnut, and red apple. I believe that I will like.
I didn't
this.
realize we were doing this with coffee now, that we were talking about their oaky or floral notes or whatever.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. How long have you been living in Seattle?
Yeah, I was about to say, it's probably that's a mid-90s innovation probably, right?
So this was a gift just for me. You didn't get your own can of black gold. I guess you probably were like, I love Ethiopian roast.
He sent me this instead, a wad of cash.
Wait a minute.
I'm sure he did stick in a wad of cash, but we'll split it 50-50.
Is that right? He gave us $80?
He gave us, I guess it's easier than Patreon.
Oh, thanks.
And this is, I think, really for me, a list of a sheaf of Betty Crocker budget casserole recipe cards.
That does seem like something that is going to get made at your house and not mine.
Do you want to make some chicken Waikiki beach?
No, I don't want pineapple in my food.
This tempting, sweet and pungent recipe comes from our newest state, John, Hawaii.
Hawaii.
Delicious.
What else? Are there stews?
Yeah, there's bologna biscuits with vegetables. Do you like cooking up bologna?
That is such a Mormon food. I can't even stand it.
How about some plantation ham pie? Not just delicious, but problematic.
Nope, that doesn't look good at all.
It looks like maybe a cinnamon roll that has...
That's raw pork.
Oh, it's parsley. It's Bisquick and parsley, and then you serve it with plantation ham pie not pictured, I think.
Nope. Keep trying.
What do we got
here? Is there
here?
A beef bourguignon by any chance?
Tuna chow mein casserole.
Nope. Don't want it.
Pizza potatoes.
No.
Now, John, two things I know about you. You love pizza and you love potatoes.
No.
How about Franken bean bake? This is just like the funny thing is these are all copyright 1971. And if you told me this was like 1958, I would totally believe you.
I mean, if this all feels like it could show up at Thanksgiving dinner.
Salmon noodles Romanoff.
Whoa. Not where I'm going to put my delicious salmon.
Have you ever just been eating like stroganoff and thought, why isn't there a can of salmon in here? Here we go. Do you like hamburger?
Yes.
Do you like pie?
Yes.
I've got some good news for you. Hamburger pie.
Oh, but that's mashed potatoes on the top.
It's just shepherd's. Yeah, it's shepherd's pie with like instant potatoes on top.
I see a little string of peas.
It's a thing where they're bragging about how bad their ingredients are. Like it doesn't say mash some potatoes. It really says use potato buds instant puffs. Use instant minced onion. It's like we're in a new scientific age, and now we have improved food to the degree that you don't have to use real food anymore.
Wow. Every one of those sounds terrible.
Thank you, Mr. Wacky. And I don't even know what's in this box.
I see some scientific glassware, so...
This is from Amelia? Possibly Amelia Bedelia?
Hello, Amelia.
They told her to run home, and she ran home.
I dated a girl named Amelia, who then went on to found Shout Your Abortion.
Oh, nice.
I doubt this is from her.
Probably not, or she would mention that.
Yeah, she probably would have just sent it to me directly.
She did watercolor this lovely postcard. Look at that.
That's very psychedelic.
And then there's so much going on here. This is like a treasure hunt. Then a hand-typed letter explaining the postcard that she made while noodling around with Norwegian decorative art.
Do you recognize the typewriter?
It looks, it's IBM Selectric Era.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's...
It's not a manual typewriter.
No, it's not. But she has gone in and put the circles over the A's in her Norwegian words. So good job. She actually has worked with some of the Indian tribes we discussed in the Wampum episode because she's a New England archaeologist.
What? I love futurelings.
This is fantastic. And she sent us a quahog from the Cape and Martha's Vineyard with the purple shell inside. Oh, wait. She sent us each one. We each get a quahog, and yours is a cherry stone clam, but was eaten with a spritz of lemon.
Uh-huh.
I see. Yeah, you don't want to send somebody a live clam in the mail.
No.
Tucked into each shell are 2 pieces of chipping debris, a byproduct of stone tool manufacture. Did you know that archaeologists actually keep the evidence?
The shards.
That somebody was making something there?
Well, that's cool.
That is super cool. She also sent me a book called Science Made Stupid. Which just sounds perfect for me.
Uh-huh.
Oh, whatever her 84-year-old's father electric typewriter is, it does have the erasable ribbon because I can see a correction here.
So, but you don't think it's a typewriter built for Norwegian writing? You think she went back and did the
it looks like she went back and put a degree sign over the A. Oh. And you get a vintage hook that she spotted at a thrift store.
Like for someone missing their hand?
She also sent along, I assume a coat hook. She also, it's decor. She also sent along a Japanese onsen bath salt packet. She knows you like baths and hopes you are not sensitive to odors. Oh, and she even sent Mindy something. My wife gets herbal tea. Also some bitter honeys and licorice toffee because she must have been at her aged father's place to use his typewriter. So
I love this care package.
Bitter honey and licorice toffees for all.
Now, we have been getting these kind of eclectic packages lately, and we didn't, it used to be rare that we would get 5 gifts in a box, but now it seems to be increasingly the norm.
It's really upped the ante, and if people ever think of just sending us one thing, we're going to be like, well, Amelia sent us.
Show me the hook.
I don't have the hook. Here are the
oh yeah, hold up the
here are the shards in the clamshell.
Shards in the clamshell.
Isn't that one of the A Mighty Wind song?
I was gonna say, oh look at that.
Okay, I'm opening your
shaving a haircut. Oh, so now I see why the purple shell of the quahog is so much more prized, because most of this shell is white. The purple is just a ring around the outside.
Oh, interesting.
So it's rare even among the clams.
Your Swedish brass hook got a bit of honey caught in it in sending. I opened it up and it already had a bit of honey caught on the end of the hook.
It's made by Smedbo.
Smedbo makes all the best brass hooks.
Look at these crazy shards.
And they sponsor the show now. So let me just say, the lasting beauty of Smedbo quality brass is easily maintained by wiping with a soft, damp cloth. And if you use code OMNIBUS on smedbo.com, isn't that fantastic?
That is fantastic.
Enjoy your hook.
Bit of honey.
Thank you, Amelia.
That's a dynamite hook, quite frankly.
I also wanted to mention, this is funny, the what is the couple's name? Jim and Kathy, I believe, sent us a copy of a Laura Ingalls Wilder style book set in a post-apocalyptic future. And the funny thing is, they are not the first people to send us this book. We still enjoy it because now John and I each have a copy. But I think because we have talked about Laura Ingalls Wilder on the show and a post-apocalyptic future,
nothing goes better.
Nobody can resist sending us the only book that combines zombie attacks with the Ingalls daughters. Thank you so much, Jim and Kathy.
I want to just point out that Smedbo are the purveyors to His Majesty the King of Sweden. So,
do you think the King of Sweden to this day needs an official purveyor of brass fittings?
Well, on the back here also is written in pencil 1986. So maybe the Smedbo, maybe in 86, the King.
I bet His Majesty just goes to IKEA now.
Yeah.
And it's like, I need a 6-pack of Smedbos.
We need to ask Cab Calloway. Well, I should remind people that Omnibus is a listener-supported show, and your contribution to the production and distribution of this show, there's a lot of breakage as we send it out, and that costs money.
Yeah, I mean, how many of these gold records are going to actually make it into the ground?
You can support the show with your generous financial contribution to patreon.com/omnibusproject. That's patreon.com/omnibusproject.
Listeners, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may be our final word. It'll be discovered long after our death. Our genius will be discovered posthumously like Henry Cavendish. Mm-hmm. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.